Hello, 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 and welcome to another exciting episode of Nothing Zilch. This time with our logos as hats. Joined with me is my co-host, the one sax man, Mr. Jacob Green, and then you have me, who can't tell the difference between animosity and anonymity, Mr. Xavier Dean. Yeah, a lot of people made fun of me for that one.
Yeah, yeah. I hope you're ready to join us in this beautiful Sunday morning. The weather's been beautiful this week.
Yes, I wouldn't say this week. It's been
I
awful
would
rain.
compare to
Oh, yeah.
okay, not this starting week, but last week. It's been as of late, the weather's been nice, but like the week before, it was definitely humid and dusty and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I agree. All right, so this week I'm starting a topic, and I was juggling different things. I could easily try to take this time to promote the most recent disc golf thing I'm working on, which I'm gonna save that for later just because the last topic I had was disc golf related. I could discuss any movie ideas that came up because I got a brand new one coming up in my head. I like to make ideas for movies, saving that as well. Could have talked about the adult prom I went to. Not sure if I'll talk about that, but it's something that's on the back burner. But today, instead, I'm going to start a
Ah,
debate between me and Jake. And any of you, if you want to put in your idea of the side of the debate, feel free to put that down in the comments. So, Jake,
but mhm.
you've got your thinking cap on. You ready
Yes,
for
both
this?
both of our thinking caps.
Yes. All right. So, just a preface. I am a big rock listener. I listen to a lot of rock music. One of my
Mhm.
top bands to listen to is a band called Linkin Park, which, big new metal band. They've made such hits as What I've Done, which is in the Transformers movie, like the first one. Crawling, Numb, which I feel like is one of their best works. The lead singer to that band ended up passing away, I think 2018 or 2019. And I want to say it was like end of last year, beginning of this year. They recently got a new artist, like a new vocalist to continue on
Okay.
the band.
Hmm.
Now, personally, I like that they got someone else because then it involves more Linkin Park music and you've got a new voice, you've got a new style. I'm big on artists going and trying new things, but this does spark a debate because there's a bunch of people who say that this,
Hmm.
Linkin Park should have stayed or should have ended with the original lead singer, Chester Bennington, and they should have changed the new or changed this band into a new band.
Hmm.
And I've had this debate with my parents, and I was thinking
Hmm.
about it, and this isn't the first time this has happened in media. This has happened,
This isn't the first time that's happened in music.
it hasn't. It's not the first time it's happened in music. This isn't the first time it's happened in movies and media. I know we've briefly discussed this on this podcast in the past, in our reboots, remakes, and
Mhm.
what was the other big one? Reboots, remakes, and sequels
Yeah,
episode.
or prequels,
Mhm. Like I said, I know we discussed this briefly, but I want to go a little more in depth by hearing your opinion, and we'll bounce off ideas. So, Jake,
Mhm.
if a
Mhm.
major member of a TV show, movie, band, or musical group ends up passing away, should that group or should whatever they're doing just completely stop, make no more things, or should they keep going?
Okay, so I'm actually glad that you mentioned this topic because this is something that I constantly am surrounded by. So, in case people don't know, my main field is music. I work a lot with music and I work a lot on my own or with different groups. Uh, and I listen to a lot of music too. Now, the main music that I listen to, I mean, I do listen to rock and metal and country and whatnot, but I mainly listen to jazz because that's the stuff that I perform the most, as well as classical music. I actually really like listening to all different kinds of music. Um, but just to narrow down the discussion point, at least starting out, um, when it comes to music groups, and when they lose a member, it's kind of up for debate whether that group should keep going or not, because it depends on the artist's vision in mind. Um, Now, I would say I'll bring up a couple examples. Now, the examples I'm going to bring up are mainly from the jazz end of things because not just because I like jazz, but because it happens a lot. And even back in the day. So let's see. The first example that I would probably bring up is let me start off with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. So, um, if you don't know this group, so Art Blakey, he was a jazz drummer. He played in big bands before, but he started leading his own group. Uh, but now the way this group was set up was interesting because throughout the years, he would, let's just say, kick out members for not the reasons that you would think. He would kick out members and replace them with different members. Not replace them, but bring in new members. And there is a specific reason as to why. Because
Want the
uh,
younger, hotter people to be in this group. That's why I'm not in there. I
shut
would,
up.
but I'm not.
He but he's been dead since the 1980s. He passed away like yeah, somewhere around 1980. I can't remember, but like um his group has been around for a long time because no matter who the personnel in that group is, it's still Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers.
Mhm.
Um, but the reason why he alternates members, or like brings in new members, kicks them out, is because the premise of his band is basically to help jazz artists jumpstart their careers. Um,
All right.
And because like this was an official performing band. This wasn't like one of those things where it's like, oh, this is a community group where we can develop young artists. No, this is a legitimate group that brings up young artists that actually get paid. And it was pretty good money too. Like Art Blakey was a very popular throughout the years. Not to the extent of like Miles Davis or John Coltrane, but he was one of those people that had a pretty consistent career all the way through. Um, but you look at his personnel throughout the years and like, they change all the time. If I were to take piano players, for instance, in the late 50s and early 60s, he had Bobby Timmons, um, who contributed a lot to the group. The other thing that Art Blakey liked from his members is that he also wanted members that could not only play well
Mhm.
and develop, but also compose music. And a lot of the music that you would hear would come from those artists from his band.
Right.
Um, but Bobby Timmons contributed compositions to the group. So did Benny Golson, who was a saxophone player, and so did Wayne Shorter, another saxophone player. Um, but Bobby Timmons, he was there from the late 50s and early 60s. Um, but then, he left to, you know, start his new career. Or I think Art Blakey might have told him like, "Hey, this is your last week with the band. Here's your paycheck. You go start off your own thing." Trumpet players, in the late 50s and early 60s, Lee Morgan was a very young trumpet player that was starting his own personal career. So, and then later on, we would get Freddie Hubbard in like the early to mid 60s. And same thing with the saxophonist, Benny Golson, he was there. And then Wayne Shorter would come in. Both of them were saxophone players. And then Cedar Walton would come in, piano player. The reason why you would alternate members, and I'm mentioning those specific groups because that's like the most well-known periods of like Art Blakey. He had a whole bunch of different members. I could pull up a document right now of like the members of Art Blakey throughout the years, and some of them are still alive today. Um, but the reason why he did that is that he was developing young artists. And if you got to a point where like you were fully developed in his band, uh, he would tell you to go leave and start your own group.
Hmm.
For the purpose of like continuing, you know, the jazz language primarily, but music as a whole. He wanted you because Art Blakey, he was a drummer and a fantastic leader. You know, he gave an example for artists to continue their process going forward. Um, but he's not the only example where personnel has changed. You know, uh, I'm trying to think of different examples because there's so many. But
Well,
I'm trying to think. Actually, there is another group that I could bring up, and that is are you familiar with a Weather Report at all?
no.
The Weather Report, if you guys don't know, their big hit on the radio was Birdland. That was somewhere. So Weather Report has been around since 1970. Uh, and that group was started, it was a jazz fusion group that got started by Wayne Shorter, saxophone player I mentioned earlier, and then Joseph Zawinul, who was a pianist and a main composer for the group. Um, and they had to change personnel a couple of times. And mainly that just had to do with their vision for how their music was constructed was different from the beginning because they weren't popular at first. Um, and that was because their stuff was very experimental and very far out, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That actually, I think it's a good thing to experiment. But the thing is that it wasn't clicking with audiences. Um, and when they did live performances, there were crowds that were just kind of mixed upon the group. So
Mhm.
their compositions, the way that they played music was very free, but they changed some things. They started to write much more formative music, um, stuff that had much more syncopated rhythms and melodies to it. Um, and they also they changed bass players a couple of times, but one of the main bass players that kind of kicked them off the ground was a bass player by the name of Jaco Pastorius. Um, and he would make his official debut with the group on Heavy Weather. which
Hmm.
is where the song Birdland came from. That record was a hit, and that was mainly due to Birdland. Um, but it was also other records beforehand. They were constantly experimenting. Um, but they've had some personnel changes, and that's because people are starting off their own groups, or they just have a different vision. Um, and sometimes groups do end because of certain personnel like moving on or just passing away, or they have problems with the band, which is another unfortunate occurrence. Um, and I could probably bring up more examples, but really, I think it's a good whether a group should continue, because even if one person leaves, that is up to the for debate for the group. And I think we can move on now to why people feel like why some people feel like, that could be, not a good change for them. And I'll tell you one of the main reasons is they become so attached to those certain artists
Hmm.
that like they cannot see anybody else do it. And because of that, they're like, oh, this group is terrible and it sucks and I wish they weren't playing. Um,
So that's kind of what's going on right now with Linkin Park
mhm,
because there are so many people who are attached to Chester and his legacy that with this new lead singer, Emily Armstrong, which is
mhm.
coming in, they're degrading the music because it's got the Linkin Park label, but they view Linkin Park as, with Chester rather than with Emily, regardless
Yeah.
of how the music is itself.
Yes. And this brings up another topic, well, another point when it comes to like not only artists changing personnel, but artists changing in general. And that is uh artists learn to experiment with one thing for a certain period of time, and they learn to not grow attached to that and move on. And now, here's the thing. I've not really listened to Linkin Park much. In fact, when you first mentioned them, I started downloading their albums on my. So I'll listen to them, and maybe I can uh hear the comparisons that you're talking about. But
So,
um
so with
but
you downloading, listen to Hybrid Theory first. That is their first.
Yeah,
You
of course. Yeah, I usually when it comes to music, specifically with artists, I like to try and go for chronological order, which is something that I haven't done before. But I've been doing that with a lot of artists as of late. And let me tell you, at least for me, it helps you to appreciate the artists a lot more and how they develop. And it again, this brings me back to what I'm gonna say now, and that is artists are always changing because they learn to not grow attached to a certain playing style. And jazz
know.
is one of the greatest examples at this. Um, let's take the most popular jazz artist throughout the history of jazz, which is Miles Davis. Miles Davis came up during the bebop era uh, that was started off by Charlie Parker, saxophonist, and Dizzy Gillespie, a trumpet player. And Miles Davis was a trumpet player too, but he started playing bebop. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm trying to remember. I think he started playing bebop around the late 40s, early 50s. Um, probably around the late 40s. But he moved on from that to what would become cool jazz. And that mainly came up when he had those collaborations with an arranger for large ensembles by the name of Gil Evans. So
Mm-hmm.
stuff like Birth of the Cool, Miles Ahead, uh, Porgy and Bess. There were it had some bebop elements in that type of music, but it was more classical oriented. You know, it was thicker textures, but it was still like orchestrally, the orchestration and the arrangement of like the different horn parts was thick in texture, but it was still jazz because there were certain jazz elements to it. You know, yeah, you still had the drum set, you still had the bass, you still have the style of it. But he did those things. He moved on from that though to do hard bop stuff, which is where his first quintet came about. And that quintet had John Coltrane and other personnel. And that was during the mid to late 50s. And then he moved on from that to do modal jazz, which is how we were able to get stuff like the most best-selling jazz record of all time, Kind of Blue, you know, again, most popular record. And that's where he did modal jazz. Actually, he did modal jazz before that record came out, but he did that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then he moved on from that when we get to the 60s, where he started to do um get into much more freer styles of jazz and much more intense styles of jazz as well. And that's where his second quintet came about. And then starting around the late 60s, early 70s, he moved on from that to do, he started to experiment with electric sounds. And that was kind of the start of what would become the jazz fusion era, where you would get much more rock oriented instruments. Well, not instruments, but like textures and styles, and other styles as well, like funk and electric instruments like electric piano, electric bass, um, and guitar. And he was starting to do all that stuff. Um, and then he would just go on, he would just continue to move on from those things till he passed away around 1990. He didn't live, I think he was around his 50s or 60s when he passed away for reasons I won't get into. But,
Mm-hmm.
and I could say this about any other jazz artist that has lived as long as Miles, or even someone like Coltrane. But I bring this up because people, artists, music artists, not just jazz, music in general, artists like Miles Davis learn to not get attached to
Mm-hmm.
certain musical styles. And that even came from performances as well, because you listen to one track that was recorded and you're like, oh yeah, I like the way that it's played. But then when you hear that same track in a live performance setting, they perform it almost completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not like it. And here's the thing about Miles in particular is that he liked the controversy because he because he was not he was aware he was not attached to certain musical styles. Although he did like certain things, he liked different artists and whatnot. But Miles knew that he would not be able to touch the audience, different factions of audiences, if he did not progress forward. That was one of the reasons he started to get into like electric music in the first place, because he saw um, rock musicians
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, he saw rock musicians and other bands and saw how like young people were excited about it. And he was like, I want to be able to touch that audience. Um, but yeah, the fact of the matter is that like he he liked the fact that people were honest about like even one time, this was during like towards the end of his life, he was walking down uh and there were audience members everywhere and he had security guards backing him up, and one person went up to him and was just like, hey, I didn't like the way that you play. Why can't you go back to the old style that you played? And the security guard was about to kick the guy out, and then Miles was like, nah, leave him alone. And that's the reason why is because he likes it when people are honest.
Hmm.
Like he liked like the the thing with him is that like if you like his music, cool. If you don't, cool. You
Right.
know? So that's a very long spiel for me. And my whole point with that is just like artists do change at some point. They can't stick to the same thing forever. If they stick to the same thing forever, then they won't be able to touch other audiences the way that they should. That's not always the case. That's not always the case with some artists,
Hmm.
but if you take a look at some of the most revered artists from throughout history and why people still like them and how many other audiences from different periods are touched by their music, a lot of those artists were able to do that because they change. And as a musician, you don't always stick to one thing. You don't like practice for a certain number of hours each day and then you're done. There's always new things to discover. Music is an ever progressing thing,
Yeah.
much like other types of medium, like,
Hmm.
architecture and movies and uh yeah, it's my thing is just like learn to understand why artists make those changes to begin with. And sometimes it could be hard to understand, especially when it comes to music, when
Hmm.
it comes to abstract forms of media. And sometimes they can't even fully explain it either. They just felt like they had to make the change.
Right.
So yeah, that's my spiel with that.
Hmm. So for me personally,
Mhm.
again, I'm gonna because I don't listen to as much jazz music as Jake does, whichever direction.
Well, again, it doesn't apply to jazz. It applies to other types of music.
Right.
You listen to much more of other stuff than I do,
Hmm.
you know.
So I would say music wise, I'm trying to think if there's another big prominent band off the top of my head that I know of who have had a major member of the band pass away and they continued going. I, I know there's a
But
I know there's a few, but
and I'm trying to think of stuff too because
here,
it's different. It's
while we're
different for
what's that?
I was just gonna say it's different because like there's some people who go off as like individual artists where
Mhm.
they're always changing the people from their groups. So like Elton John and Billy Joel as examples. But then
Yes.
you got bands like Queen
And
as an
Queen,
example.
I
Hmm.
don't think Queen has released anything after Freddie Mercury's passing.
Yeah,
I know there's
yeah.
that. I know Nirvana hasn't released anything after uh Kurt Cobain's passing. Like I said, for
Hmm.
a time Linkin Park hadn't released anything, and then sometime in the early 2020s, I think it was 22, they started releasing like anniversary albums. Oh, I know,
Hmm.
2020 they released an anniversary album because it was the 20th anniversary of Hybrid Theory, where they where they introduced, different demos that they had been working on. And then when the 20th anniversary of Meteora came out, they ended up releasing two newer songs, but those two newer songs focused on, or they were still written by Chester, they just hadn't released those songs until then. And then after that, they decided to look for another new lead singer, which I feel, especially with the amount of time they spent not releasing music, I feel like in order to keep the idea of Linkin Park fresh and new, that is the best thing they could have done. And like I said, I like this new artist. I think she has an amazing voice. I've
Mhm.
probably listened to The Emptiness Machine just as much as I've listened to Heavy or Bleed It Out from the earlier works. And like I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier, this doesn't just go with music. This goes with films and TV shows. I think the three most prominent times when an actor has passed away and okay, four prominent. The four prominent times when an actor has passed away and companies have had to decide what to do. We've got Chadwick Boseman, which for those of you who don't know, he was the actor who played Black Panther in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Forever.
Yep, Wakanda Forever. But in 2020, he ended up passing away, and Marvel had to decide what they were going to do. Partially because Black Panther at the time had only been in four, four separate Marvel projects. And it was a fairly new character to the MCU.
He was gone too soon. And to be honest, like, um, just slight tangent, um, Black Panther should have been better than what it came out.
What's that?
I said Black Panther should have been a much better movie than how it came out, if I'm being completely honest.
Okay, you and I are going to fight about that after this. You're going to have that fight. We're not going to record the fight, but we're going to have that fight. But anyway, so Chadwick Boseman passed away, and Marvel had already planned a Black Panther sequel. So then they had to decide, do we recast him? Do we kill him off screen, or do we not make another film? What they ended up doing as a way to preserve Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther, they ended up killing Black Panther off screen, which I'm not going to go out there and say was a bad idea. I do feel it does help cement Chadwick Boseman's legacy as the Black Panther.
I think the when they did Wakanda Forever, I think that was the most respectful thing to do.
Yes. It was the most
Um,
respectful thing. And I mean, it's a Marvel movie. You've got multiverses. I'm sure sometime in Doomsday they're gonna make a new or have a new Black Panther with a different actor.
or do another What If series.
Well, they've already done three of them. I know Chadwick Boseman voiced Black Panther in the first one. I don't know what they did for the other ones. Um, but due to time, I'm only gonna bring up one more, and this one's gonna be from a TV show. And while I'm talking about this, I'm gonna quickly hop onto IMDb because
Mhm.
I, for the life of me, can't think of the original act or for the actors. But in Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated one,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, the original actor who played Uncle Iroh and I want to say his name was Mako. Um,
While you're doing that, I'm gonna chow down on my roast duck.
yep.
Um, um, um,
Uh,
um.
how long did this run for? Yeah. So the original voice actor for Uncle Iroh, who was Mako, he ended up passing away in 2006. Avatar: The Last Airbender ran from 2005 all the way to 2008. I'm not sure how influential to your life Uncle Iroh was, but Uncle Iroh is the reason why I drink tea. I'm
Uncle
not gonna
Iroh responsible for a lot of things. Honestly, he might be the best character in Last Airbender.
right, but so
I
with
like.
Mako's passing, after the last Airbender had to decide what they did or what they
Mhm,
would do. So
mhm.
what they ended up doing was they ended up recasting Uncle Iroh. I don't I don't remember who his current actor is. I know his current
Mhm.
actor's still alive. But unlike what Marvel did and they killed off Black Panther off screen, Avatar: The Last Airbender decided to keep Uncle Iroh. And I feel like for Uncle Iroh's character, that was for the best. Just because Uncle Iroh is the
He's the teacher figure.
yes.
He's the person to bring on the wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is actually real quick. This is pretty similar to what happened in Ninjago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so Ninjago, I'm not counting the Dragons Rising series, but the original series, which was titled Masters of Spinjitzu, ran from like 2011 to uh 20 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it 2022? I think it was 2022. Um, and the voice actor for Cole was Kirby Morrow from like seasons from the pilots to season 14. Um, but in the final season of the show, well, during even before season 13, which Cole was like the main feature, before he would come out, Kirby Morrow, the actor for Cole, unfortunately passed away. I don't know if it was an illness, I can't remember. It might have been a car accident. Might have been the case. But he was I think he was in his 30s or 40s when
Mm-hmm.
he passed away. But they had to get a different actor, and I don't remember the actor's name now, but he is currently the person that is playing Cole. And that was a decision where it's like they couldn't really kill him off. Well, they probably could have, and
Yeah.
then brought him back as a ghost or something. Uh,
One
much
of
like
them the
what Marvel
first
did.
time it's happened.
Yeah, but yeah, these things just happen, and you just have to learn to accept them. I think the current voice actor for Cole does a fair enough job. I think he brings the spirit of the character pretty well. Um, Same thing with Mario, actually, with Charles Martinet. He's not dead, but he had to retire, and there's someone else that plays Mario in the games now, making all the different sound effects, and he has his own take of the character that I actually like.
Right.
So the moral of this whole episode is don't be afraid of change. You
Yeah.
know,
Well, not only don't be afraid of change, but you know, we're all human. Not everything's gonna last forever.
and
There are
no two people, no two people are the same.
right, no
So,
two people are the same, but people are gonna choose, or people are gonna be upset either way. They're gonna be upset if, after someone's death, something doesn't continue on, or they're gonna be upset if it continues on with a different person, or all of that. As long as we just accept that all this is happening, appreciate the old, embrace the new, everything will be fine. But with that, that is all the time we have for this week. Next week, Jake, you have, or I hope you have a topic set up for us for next week. If not, you got a week to prepare.
I'll narrow it down. I
We'll
got
narrow it
several.
down. All right.